The gas lamps outside flickered weakly, their dim glow struggling against the suffocating fog that draped itself over New York City. The Ashcroft Manor loomed like a shadow, its dark brick facade melding with the night. Emma Harris, her once vibrant auburn hair now streaked with grey, shuffled across the cold wooden floor of her top-floor apartment. The clinking of her paintbrush against the ceramic palette was the only sound in the dimly lit studio, where unfinished canvases stretched across easels like ghostly sentinels. Emma had always been a creature of solitude, but lately her isolation had deepened into something more profound, something almost tangible. She had become accustomed to the silence of her apartment, finding solace in the rhythmic strokes of her brush and the whispered echoes of her own thoughts. But tonight, something felt different. An inexplicable chill lingered in the air, seeping into her bones. Her gaze fell upon the small metal mailbox nestled beside the door. It was a peculiar place for an artist to receive letters, an old-fashioned relic in an otherwise modern world. Emma approached it reluctantly, as if expecting some unwelcome intruder. The mailbox was a relic of the building's past, its tarnished surface and rusting hinge a testament to years of neglect. Inside the mailbox, nestled between mundane bills and a crumpled flyer for a local play, was an envelope, elegantly addressed in a handwriting that was unfamiliar and yet unnervingly precise. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she retrieved it, her heart beating a staccato rhythm against her ribs. The envelope was sealed with a crimson wax stamp, embossed with an intricate pattern she didn't recognize. She pried it open with a sense of trepidation, her breath catching in her throat. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in an elaborate illustration of a monstrous creature, its eyes hollow and dark. Its jagged mouth seemed to mock her, as if it were laughing at her deepest fears. A chill ran down her spine. Emma's eyes darted around the room, as though she might find some explanation in the shadows that danced along the walls. She was alone, always alone, but the letter suggested otherwise. Days turned into weeks, and the letters continued to arrive. Each envelope contained a new, increasingly disturbing illustration, each more intricate and grotesque than the last. They seemed to predict unsettling events, trivial misfortunes at first, but soon escalating into more ominous portents. Emma's world began to crumble under the weight of her own paranoia. She found herself obsessively examining every detail of the illustrations, searching for clues or patterns that might explain their origin. The once familiar comfort of her apartment now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on her with every creak and groan. The shadowy corners of her studio seemed to come alive, whispering cruelly to her as she painted. Emma's interactions with the outside world grew sparse. She avoided her landlord's concerned inquiries and the occasional visit from a distant cousin who tried to reconnect. Her isolation became a cocoon of dread, each letter drawing her further away from reality. She stopped answering the door and stopped picking up the phone. The only contact she had with the world was through the disturbing, cryptic messages that continued to invade her sanctuary. One evening, after receiving a particularly unsettling letter depicting her own image, trapped within a nightmarish landscape, Emma discovered a hidden compartment in her apartment, a secret she had never known existed. Inside were old, yellow documents and faded photographs that seemed to depict someone from her past. The images were hauntingly familiar, but she couldn't quite place them. As she dug deeper into the hidden compartment, she uncovered a tattered journal. The entries were dated from decades ago, written by a woman who had lived in the same apartment. The journal described a tormenting presence that had driven the writer to madness, eerily similar to Emma's own experiences. The journal led Emma to an old photograph of the woman who had lived in her apartment, a woman who looked strikingly like her. Emma's hands shook as she pieced together the chilling connection. The woman in the photograph had been committed to an asylum, her last entry in the journal detailing the arrival of disturbing letters predicting her downfall. The realization struck Emma with full force. The letters were not just random. They were a continuation of the torment experienced by her predecessor. The same dark force that had driven the previous occupant mad was now targeting her. Emma's fear transformed into a desperate quest for answers. She began to investigate the asylum mentioned in the journal, piecing together fragmented clues. Her search led her to Victor Carrington, a reclusive artist and former psychiatrist with a dark reputation. Carrington had been rumored to have conducted unethical experiments on patients, delving into their deepest fears. Emma discovered that Carrington's experiments had been discontinued abruptly after a series of mysterious disappearances. Victor Carrington was not just an artist, but a man obsessed with the darkest corners of the human mind. Emma learned that he had continued his experiments in secret, using his artistic skills to document and manipulate the fears of his subjects. Emma was horrified to realize that she had become his latest subject, a canvas for his twisted creations. Determined to end the torment, Emma confronted Victor Carrington. The meeting took place in a dilapidated warehouse, Carrington's private studio, where he had been conducting his macabre experiments. The walls were covered in disturbing illustrations, each one depicting the fears of his victims in horrifying detail. Carrington's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the madness surrounding him. He revealed that he had been watching Emma for years, studying her fears through the letters and her art. He had hoped to create a masterpiece of terror by pushing her to the brink, using her own nightmares as his brushstrokes. Emma, fueled by a mixture of rage and desperation, tried to destroy Carrington's work. But as she fought back, the true horror was revealed. The letters had been a means to manipulate her, drawing her closer to her own psychological breaking point. Carrington's ultimate goal was to transfer his malevolent influence into Emma's own psyche, making her fears his own. In a climactic struggle, Emma managed to destroy the source of Carrington's power, the central piece of his grotesque collection. As the final illustration burned, Carrington's presence seemed to dissolve into the smoke, leaving Emma alone in the darkness. Emma returned to her apartment, now scarred but free from Carrington's influence. The letters had stopped arriving, but the trauma they inflicted lingered. The Ashcroft Manor remained as ominous as ever, but Emma found solace in the knowledge that she had faced her fears head-on. Despite her victory, Emma continued to live with the shadows of her past and the eerie sense of being watched. The whispers in the ink had faded, but their echoes remained, a constant reminder of the darkness that had nearly consumed her. As she looked out over the fog-covered city from her window, she realized that the true horror was not just in the letters or in Carrington's twisted mind, but in the part of herself that had been exposed and tested by the relentless force of her own fears. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quaint, historic town of Eldridge. Mark Peterson drove his battered old station wagon up the winding driveway of the Victorian house he had just purchased. The house stood tall and imposing, its turrets and gables silhouetted against the darkening sky. He hoped this move would be a fresh start for him and his young daughter, Lily. "Welcome to our new home," Mark said with forced cheer as he looked over at Lily, who was peering out the window with wide, curious eyes. The house was in disrepair, its once grand exterior now faded and weathered. The garden was overgrown, and the wrought iron gate creaked as it swung open. Despite its state, Mark saw potential. It was a chance to rebuild, to make a new life for himself and Lily after the divorce. As they unloaded boxes and settled in, Mark felt a strange sense of unease, a subtle discomfort that he dismissed as first-day jitters. Lily seemed excited, exploring the house with an enthusiasm that momentarily lifted Mark's spirits. He reassured her that everything would be fine and that they would make this place their own. Days passed, and the newness of the house began to wear off. The boxes were mostly unpacked, and the daily routine of life resumed. One afternoon, as Mark sorted through the mail, he found a letter addressed to him with no return address. The envelope was old-fashioned, with a hand-drawn seal that bore an intricate symbol he didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued, Mark opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in cryptic symbols and a chilling illustration of a shadowy figure. The figure's eyes seemed to follow him, and an unsettling chill ran down his spine. The message was cryptic, almost like a riddle. The shadows linger where light fears to tread. Mark dismissed the letter as a prank, perhaps from a local teenager. He threw it away, though the image lingered in his mind, casting a dark shadow over his thoughts. A few days later, Lily came running into the living room, clutching a letter in her small hands. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Daddy, I got a letter too," she said, her voice trembling. Mark took the letter from her, his heart sinking as he saw that it was similar to the one he had received. The envelope was addressed to Lily, and inside was a disturbing illustration of a grotesque creature with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched in a sinister grin. "Where did this come from?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found it in the mailbox," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was just like the one you got." Mark's concern deepened. He tried to comfort Lily, but the sight of the disturbing letter unsettled him. He decided to investigate further, hoping to find some explanation. Mark's investigation led him to the local library, where he discovered the house's unsettling history. Eleanor Blackwood, the previous owner, had been a reclusive artist who vanished mysteriously a decade ago. According to town records, she had been driven mad by strange letters similar to the ones Mark and Lily were receiving. The more Mark learned about Eleanor, the more he realized the letters were part of a pattern. Eleanor's descent into madness was marked by her obsession with the cryptic symbols and disturbing illustrations. Her final days were spent in isolation, her sanity unraveling as the letters became more menacing. Mark also learned that Eleanor had made desperate attempts to reach out for help, but her pleas were ignored. The local townspeople had dismissed her as simply eccentric, not realizing the true extent of the terror she faced. The letters continued to arrive, each one more threatening than the last. Mark and Lily became increasingly isolated, their sense of normalcy eroded by the constant fear. The messages seemed to be tailored to their deepest fears, and the cryptic symbols appeared to shift and change depending on who read them. Mark's attempts to contact the local authorities were met with skepticism. The town's historical society was the only place where he found some solace, as the elderly historian Margaret Wilkins seemed to take an interest in his plight. Margaret revealed that the house had a reputation for being haunted, with reports of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena dating back to its construction. The letters were believed to be the work of a malevolent force that preyed on the vulnerabilities of its occupants. Desperate to protect Lily, Mark confronted the malevolent force in a final, desperate attempt to end the nightmare. He returned to the house late at night, armed with the knowledge he had gathered from Margaret and the history books. The house was silent, its shadows seeming to stretch and warp in the flickering light of his lantern. Mark felt a chilling presence as he ventured into the attic, where he believed the source of the terror might be. In the attic, he found a hidden compartment containing old letters and drawings that matched those he had received. As he examined them, he felt a presence behind him, a dark, oppressive force that seemed to whisper threats and promises of doom. Mark's confrontation with the malevolent force was intense and harrowing. The letter's symbols glowed with an eerie light, and the shadowy figure from the illustrations seemed to materialize in the darkness. In a desperate act, Mark destroyed the letters and burned the drawings, hoping to break the force's hold. The following days were marked by an eerie calm. The letters stopped arriving, and the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued the house began to lift. Mark and Lily slowly began to reclaim their sense of normalcy. The town's historical society took an interest in the house's history, and Margaret Wilkins promised to help uncover more about the dark forces that had once haunted it. Mark and Lily decided to stay in Eldridge, their ordeal leaving them with a deeper bond and a renewed sense of hope. Though the nightmare had ended, Mark remained haunted by the memory of the letters and the dark presence that had nearly consumed them. He knew that the past could never truly be erased, but he found solace in the knowledge that they had faced the unseen forces and emerged stronger. Isabella Martinez enjoyed the crisp autumn air as she walked from her car to Crestwood High School. The town was beautiful in the fall, with its leaves turning brilliant shades of orange and red. But as she approached the school, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease that had settled over her in recent days. Her classroom was a sanctuary of order amidst the chaos of school life. She was in the midst of preparing for her next lesson when she noticed an envelope on her desk, its presence unnerving and unexplained. It was old-fashioned, with a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar symbol. Opening it, Isabella found a disturbing illustration of a brutal massacre, the details too vivid to ignore. The accompanying note was brief but chilling. The sins of the past return to claim the present. Isabella tried to dismiss it as a prank, but the image and the message haunted her thoughts throughout the day. As the days went by, Isabella received more letters. Each one contained detailed sketches of violent and horrific events that had supposedly happened in Crestwood's past. The illustrations depicted scenes of violence and terror, events that had never been publicly acknowledged. The letters became increasingly personal, revealing unsettling details about her own family history. Isabella's concern grew when several of her students started receiving similar letters. Their frightened faces and the eerie similarity to her own letters made it clear that something sinister was at play. She began to investigate the origins of these messages, hoping to find a rational explanation. Isabella's search for answers led her to Crestwood's local library and historical society. There, she met Margaret Harlow, the town's historian, who was initially skeptical but intrigued by Isabella's findings. Margaret revealed that Crestwood had a dark history, including a massacre that had been buried in the town's past. The massacre had occurred in the late 1800s and was linked to a series of unsolved disappearances. Isabella's own family had been among the prominent families of that era, and there were rumors of their involvement in the tragic events. Margaret provided Isabella with old newspapers and records which hinted at a curse connected to the massacre. The letters grew more menacing, with personal attacks on Isabella's family and disturbing illustrations that seemed to predict future events. Isabella learned that the curse was connected to a woman named Eliza Thornfield, a victim of the massacre who had been wronged by Isabella's ancestors. Eliza's spirit had been restless and vengeful, and the curse was a means of exacting revenge on those connected to the perpetrators of the massacre. As Isabella dug deeper, she discovered that her own family had been involved in covering up the massacre and silencing witnesses, which had allowed the curse to fester. The letters led Isabella to an abandoned graveyard on the outskirts of town, overgrown with weeds and hidden from view. There, she found the remnants of the massacre's victims, their graves marked by crude, forgotten headstones. The discovery confirmed the details of the massacre and the reality of Eliza Thornfield's curse. As Isabella explored the graveyard, she encountered increasingly disturbing manifestations of Eliza's spirit. The ghostly presence was palpable, and Isabella felt the weight of the past pressing down on her. Determined to end the curse, Isabella sought a way to appease Eliza Thornfield's spirit. With Margaret's help, she performed a ritual to honor the victims of the massacre and seek forgiveness for her ancestors' sins. The ritual was fraught with danger, as Eliza's spirit grew more agitated and vengeful. During the climax of the ritual, Isabella faced Eliza's spirit in a terrifying confrontation. The spirit revealed the depth of her anger and the suffering she had endured. Isabella pleaded for mercy, offering to uncover and share the truth about the massacre with the town. The ritual brought a sense of closure to Eliza Thornfield's restless spirit. The letters ceased, and the malevolent presence that had haunted Isabella and her students dissipated. The truth about the massacre and the curse was revealed to the town, and the community began the process of acknowledging and making amends for its dark past. Isabella's students and family were safe, and the town of Crestwood began to heal from the scars of its forgotten history. Isabella, though forever changed by her experience, found a renewed sense of purpose in her role as a history teacher, committed to ensuring that the town's past would not be forgotten or ignored. Thank you for joining us on this terrifying journey through the shadows. We hope these chilling tales of paranoia, supernatural revenge, and dark history have left you with more than just a few goosebumps. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a spine-tingling episode of Fear Files. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What was the scariest moment for you? Until next time, keep your lights on and your fears close. Stay brave, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see.